So my name's Jo. I'm on the ASD spectrum, or autistic spectrum disorder as some people say. I'm a single mum and both of my kids are also on the spectrum, and design had always been something that I loved and that I, redesigned my home all the time. So I went back to school and got my diploma, and with all the issues that I had with my daughter, I'd started researching a lot of things. So the women's brain, the autistic brain, and how they all work together and how we function. So getting my diagnosis made a lot of sense. In high school, I struggled, but especially when I started senior school, the lights, I now know it was the lights, but I struggled with migraine. Apart from all the social issues that I had from reading social cues correctly, the migraine, the anxiety, and nobody could answer what those problems were. So all these things started making me think about how design and our everyday lives affect the lives of those people who are neurodivergent. When it comes to design and autism, there's not a great deal that's actually written. And what is written tends to be written by neurotypical people who don't actually know what it's like to live with the struggles that we live with. There's a generalised comment that says, when you're designing for people on the spectrum, you need to work with colours that are calming, so pale blues and pale greens. And I did that with my daughter initially. So she was 12, she was struggling so badly with confidence, anxiety, depression, everything else that comes along with it. So I'm like, right, I'll do her bedroom, and I've done it in this beautiful pale mint, but her anxiety got worse, her self-confidence got worse, her insomnia got worse. And that's when I started thinking about colour and autism and those generalised statements that people make. So when I worked with my daughter on colour, and I ended up painting her room in a really deep blood red, which is one of the big no-no colours, the reverse happened. So her self-confidence lifted, her anxiety decreased, her insomnia improved, and that was what started my research on colour and autism. Being on the spectrum, we can really hone in on some events that other people might think are irrelevant. And those events can mortify us or have such an adverse effect. And you may or may not realise that when it's linked with the colour, especially. So it might be that you had a really close relationship with your nan and her favourite colour was blue. And so as an adult, you love blue, it makes you feel comfortable, it brings back those memories of that really secure time. On the flip side, I had a lot of struggles in high school. My school uniform was green. It took me a really long time to realise that the reason why I didn't like green so much is that it took me back to high school and to a colour that I had to wear every day. There is no set answer for what colour is better for a neurotypical person, let alone a neurodiverse person. On the back of seeing my daughter interact with colour and how that affected her, I started thinking about, well, okay, what is the tool that I can use to help understand an individual's relationship with colour? I wanted to create some colour cards that I could work with people to get, in part intuitively or visual cues or whatever, to understand someone's relationship with colour. And I selected a range of colours that fitted best to what I saw in colour. So now we've got these amazing colour cards, but these are cue cards. They're not designed to specify the colour specifically. So if I show these to my daughter, for example, and say, okay, which colours make you feel happy or which colours make you feel safe, and she can work through all the different colours. If you're working with someone who might be non-verbal, there's different cues that their carer or their OT know better than, you know, you do as an outsider, and it's a group approach then to work out which colours connect with that person. We've got each of the colour groups in here. There's about 52 cards, and I'm really happy to now have these as a tool. I've trialled these with a couple of people who found it really good when they haven't previously understood their relationship with colour. So it's just a tool to bring out how you resonate with those colours. Autism isn't a disease. It is just that our brains work differently to a neurotypical person. And for each of us, that is different and it presents differently. So you're looking at 7 different senses. So I had migraine in high school, which I know is linked to fluorescent lighting, for example. So when you look at lighting and autism, you can be hypersensitive or hyposensitive on every one of the different senses. So with the lights, I see the flicker and it drives me a little bit batty. But what the biggest problem is the sound that's driven by the light mechanism. So the buzz that's created by fluorescent lights and old format lights is nuts. It just buzzes in my head. When you're looking at sensitivity to sound, to light, to colour, to everything else, if you think about a glass, that all the sensory inputs, and some of them you don't recognise, you don't know that it's happening, it's like it's in the background. So all of the different things that you experience are like rocks going into the glass, and eventually it gets to the point where the glass can't hold anymore and it'll crack. So lighting, for example, when you're looking at zero flicker lighting, so a fluorescent light, say, has 100% movement, so you've got the sound, you've got the flicker. LEDs are obviously better, they're about 25% of the value, but there is still a sensory input there. When you look at zero flicker lighting, you've got none of that, so you're instantly taking that away. And that's not only good for people on the spectrum, but also people with acquired brain injuries, epilepsy. Large number of people can benefit from this. What I'd like to see is changes within the education system, and this is huge for me and has been a huge issue for my kids. So my daughter went to a local private school, and the issues that we had there was, so when she was overwhelmed in class, she was allowed to show a sign which would enable her to leave the environment to find respite. Okay, so I've held up a card and I've exited the sensory overload situation that I'm in. Where do I go? So my daughter was offered to go to student support, and she did that once. But the thing is student support has the same lighting, it has the same acoustics. At the time she went into there was another child on the spectrum who was having an outburst. So that just added to her sense of not coping. So generally what would happen if my daughter got to the point where she was completely overloaded, I would end up having to go and pick her up, because there was no way for her to reset herself in order to go back to learning. But if there was an area in a school where a child could go where the sensory input, or from lighting, from acoustics, from everything else, was voided, where they could just spend 20 minutes regrouping themselves, the chances is that you'll have a child that will then be able to go back to successfully learning. Biophyllic design is something new for me. Now, a lot of people, when they think biophyllic design, they think it's just about having plants in your space, and it is so much more than that. So Our eyes have evolved over millennia to pick up these natural patterns in the natural world. It helps bring us into a state of relaxation or to feel comfortable rather than living in a fight or flight scenario. And then in the last couple of 100 years, we've put ourselves in white boxes in homes with square lines, whites that aren't in the natural world, straight lines aren't in the natural world, and then we've wondered why, as a whole, we're getting more and more stressed. So we've got these patterns that occur in the natural world. If you think about cloud formations or the way a tree grows, the way its branches grow, the way the leaves move in the wind, it turns out that a lot of old architecture incorporated a number of patterns. So a lot of the Islamic designs or the old cathedrals, the patterns that they've got in their architecture link into the natural world. And so those patterns do make us feel more relaxed and more comfortable. A lot of design for disability is centred around physical disabilities and hasn't previously really looked at cognitive disabilities. If you look at Phillip Island has the opportunity to really lead the way in terms of inclusive design or design for diversity. There's a lot that can be done. Phillip Island is a tourist destination. There's so much here for people to do and experience. We've got amazing wildlife, coastal areas, but the issue is how many people with a different ability can actually access those things. So, the go-karts or the penguins or, can we get a wheelchair there? Yeah, we can probably get a wheelchair there, but how do we look at wayfinding? How do we cope with sensory overload for other people, other steps that we can take? There's a lot of those connections that we've got to work with where we're protecting the environment, we're protecting our heritage, but also encouraging the tourism, which is the lifeblood of our community. And why wouldn't you want to share everything that the island has to offer? Getting that design right makes a difference for local residents and for tourists. So to have a local council who's interested in improving their accessibility for people of all abilities. So design for diversity is the word that I like to use. We are all diverse, whether we're neurotypical, whether we're neurodiverse, whether we're physically abled or not as abled. It covers every spectrum of person. My goals. Do you know what? To even help one person feel more confident, less anxious in their environment is a win.